Welcome, folks, to this month's First Friday at Fusion Studio. My name is Rich Dione. I'm a co-director of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering here at Purdue University. On my right,
Mercer Applin. Hi, everybody. I'm a clinical assistant professor of audio technology in the Department of Theater and Dance here at Purdue, and an audio technologist here at the Fusion Studio.
fantastic. We are coming to you once again from the John Martinson Entertainment and Engineering Labs, and we're super thrilled and excited to welcome Paul Brunner to the First Friday event today. I'm going to read his bio here so I don't get it wrong. Paul brings over 20 years of experience bridging theater, engineering, and education. He's now a consultant with WJHW, where he focuses on rigging systems and project management, and continues to serve in national standards and leadership roles across the entertainment industry. It's a true pleasure to get a chance to talk with you, Paul. I've known you for, I don't know how many years, but I was trying to remember one of my first experiences with you, and it was at a commission meeting for USITT at some point in the hither and yon, when you were talking about some of your really early work on green theater and green construction practices. It's a vibrant memory that I have, and I have enjoyed Paul's leadership and skills and wisdom for many, many years. So it's great to have you here and talk to you and hear a little bit about your career.
Great. Well, thanks for the very nice introduction and invite to talk with you all today. And I'm going to share my screen and have a presentation that we'll take a look at. I'll have a lot of sort of visuals and pictures of some facilities. I realized I could sort of tell some stories here and share some technical information through some visuals, and it helped me talk through all of it. So let me share my screen.
Folks, and if you have a question for Paul, feel free and drop that in the chat. We'll try and nestle that into conversation as it fits. And Paul, take it away.
All right, hopefully you can see the first slide then. So great. So I'm going to sort of just walk through my career a bit, do some project highlights. And again, I realized as I was putting this together, it became a bit of a story of facilities and experiences and some of those things. So I'm going to mention a few of those moments there that kind of drew me to where I am today. So hit the right button here and we will advance, hopefully. There we go. All right, so we're going to see a couple pictures of these things in a little bit, but there's a gymatorium in my hometown of New Ulm, Minnesota. And I was in junior high, I was 7th or 8th grade, standing on the stage for a choir performance. And I saw someone, a curtain walker. So they were standing upstage, walking with the traveler curtain, and they had a headset on. And I was fascinated. What are they saying? Who are they listening to? They're looking up at the lights. How do those lights work? I mean, in that moment, I was just sort of getting enthralled in what's all around me here. There's a microphone. How's that plugged in? Where's that? What's going on? How does this all work? We're just sort of taking that all in and soaking it all up as the curtain opened and the choir director started the first song, and I was looking around at the lights, and probably missed that first cue for to begin that song. But at any rate, that was something that I realized, like, this is interesting. And then, weeks after that, I joined the junior high as an 8th grader. I joined the stage crew, and we volunteered to help do events in the evenings when there were concerts, when there was a travel log that came through, whatever was going on, we were able to help with that stuff, setting up risers, setting up lighting, making mistakes, all kinds of stuff. So that was kind of where I got the bug, kind of early on in my middle school career. And another moment I think of when I was in high school, our choir, because I sang through choir all the way through college, actually. We took a choir tour to Chicago, and we saw a production of Miss Saigon at the Auditorium Theater. That was sitting at the Auditorium Theater for like 6 or 7 months at the time, was very popular. And there too, I remember leaving that facility thinking, like, I have to do this for a living. I have to be part of this somehow. And it wasn't necessarily about what was going on stage, although that was fascinating, but it was much more about the facility, the experience, all of how that was all working together. It was like, this is something I want to be a part of somehow. And I didn't know what that meant to me at that moment, but those are kind of some moments I think of. I went to college at Southwest Minnesota State University in Marshall, Minnesota, with a BA in history and minor in theater arts. I spent a lot more time in the theater, and really enjoyed my time there. We were a bunch of happy pirates putting on shows. There was about 20 of us undergrads doing the shows there in a really small state school. So we got to do a lot. We made mistakes, did things when the parents weren't watching and kind of stuff. But it was a lot of fun and really solidified my interest in theater and wanting to do more in design and in just putting on live shows. So right out of there, I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and got my MFA in '01 with my advisor, Dennis Dorn, and he taught me a lot too. I went to grad school and I realized I didn't know as much as a lot of the people around me.
Mm.
In the beginning, that was intimidating. And I learned over time that that was really good because I was kind of a blank slate. I didn't have a lot of mistakes or, things that I had to get fixed that way. I was ready to absorb stuff and learn it fresh and learn it kind of in a systematic way. And it really absorbed a lot in those 3 years under Dennis. And he taught me about what I learned which was a technical manager. If the old saying sort of holds true that there tends to be two types of technical directors or technical managers in theater, one that's kind of a shop-oriented, more hands-on style TD, and versus one who's much more of a desk or managerial type one. I'm definitely the desk guy, especially given where I am today, spending 95% of my time, designing theater rigging and stuff. So, but he was continues to be a good friend and a great advisor. And as was mentioned a few minutes ago, that's where I also started my interest in greener theater and more environmentally friendly theater design and approaches to technology. And that started during that time, right around 1999. It was a paper in one of my theater history classes, I think. We had to do some kind of research paper, and this is what I did. And it was interesting, but that led to some articles and conference presentations. And, I got to know a lot of people doing that. I don't have much time to really talk about that today, but there might be some time later for some questions. But if you want to learn more about that, go to BroadwayGreen.com for the Broadway Green Alliance. That I think remains the best place to get information and resources to do more environmentally friendly theater. So this is a picture of me in college when I was the sound designer at Southwest State. I'm going to get rid of that picture so you can't take a screenshot of it. But back in the mid 90s, I was doing sound design there with a couple of reel-to-reel players and doing, tape editing, cutting tape, taping it together, making loops in some cases for sound effects and running the sound. And it was a lot of fun. That was one of those things I did back then. All analog with 4 speakers in a 300-seat auditorium. And just like I said, it was just a lot of fun. I started doing that for a couple of years, and then I moved into doing lighting and eventually did more of the construction and set construction stuff, which is what I really enjoyed doing more than anything else, I think, was kind of mapping out how to build the sets and stuff. So, but it sort of speaks to my background of touching on a lot of old technologies as well as current ones, and we're going to see some older technologies here in a little bit. So out of grad school, I assumed some faculty positions, '01 to '03. '01 and '02, I was at Oklahoma State University for a couple of years and then moved to Indiana. My wife is from Indiana, so we were looking to get closer to family after we got married in '01. And so I spent a couple of years at Indiana University South Bend campus. And then in '05, I got hired as the staff technical director for the Indiana University School of Music and their opera and ballet theater. So I spent 3 years there, and that's where we're going to spend a fair amount of our time this afternoon, taking a look at that musical arts center and some of the productions I did there. Also spent 11 years as head of theater technology at IU Theater and Drama, which was maybe 500 feet away from the opera building, but in a different facility and under a different organization, and but did teaching there primarily and really enjoyed my time there, working with graduate students in particular. During that time, I also spent a lot more of my efforts getting involved in USITT with board service and spent some time for 6 years as secretary on the board, getting sort of even more involved in the operations and governance of the Institute and really enjoyed that time. So During that era, I also was the technical director for the USITT USA Prague Quadrennial exhibit. If we have time later, we'll touch on that a little bit because that's kind of an interesting, non-traditional project. And then the last sort of number of years here, I guess it's about 6 years or so, I've been away from academia. I took the leap to the private sector just before the pandemic and was the business development manager for Thurn Incorporated and their unit on stage rigging equipment, and led their sales efforts for almost 5 years. And the last 2 years I've been with WJHW Theater Consultants, primarily doing rigging, 2 years last month. So it's been an interesting ride. So just briefly, this is the junior high school theater I was talking about, built in about 1936. And this is a sort of traditional theater gymatorium. So I've got a few pictures here that I'm showing. You can see from the, if I can get the right button here, I was going to get a laser pointer. There we go. To kind of lead myself along. Well, that's going to mark things up. Sorry, I should have looked at this before we got here. Oh. Can you see
all
my?
else fails, I think we can see your cursor. So
Okay, I think you see my cursor. I'll move it around so we can all see it. So you can see the audience. It's got about 700 seats or so. They've renovated the auditorium in the last 5 years. New paint. They brought it up to code with new lighting and new seats. So it's a nice, fresh auditorium. And then the gym stage is sort of, those two things are kind of the same thing. The gym floor and the stage are the same thing. So you can see a side view here on the right. That's actually a friend of mine who I went to school with named Jay Kalk. He does a fabulous tribute show for Johnny Cash. If you can catch that anywhere in the Midwest, called Church of Cash, it's fantastic. He has a great voice for it. But anyway, interesting facility. You can see all the drapes up above. Some of that's dead hung. Some of it has very sketchy rigging going through the ceiling and up and over. It's not going to fall out of the sky. I've looked at it recently, but it definitely needs some help. And they're in the process of gathering funds to do some renovations there in terms of the rigging and lighting and refresh that space. But it's a nice looking space, as you can see the picture in the bottom left there. And it kind of gives you a sense of the orientation of the gym too. I played basketball there as a kid, and now the school has been closed and they've got new facilities and stuff. But this remains the primary auditorium in my hometown. But it's kind of nice to be involved after all these years, kind of behind the scenes and helping them do some renovations and refreshing of that space. So,
Paul, is the floor still painted to be a basketball court?
it is. Yep, it's still a
That's
basketball
amazing,
court.
but it's not a working school anymore.
Correct. Yep.
I love that they've kept it that way. That's amazing. I love it.
I think it's part of the character of the space. I mean, if it were me,
Yeah.
I'd paint it black yesterday, but I think it's part of the character of the space. Yeah.
Yeah.
The old purple and white there. So, and my mom went to school there eons ago as well. It's kind of a neat old space. So, and it's good that they've kept care of it. So, jumping to a more interesting facility. So, again, in 2005 and 2008, I spent 3 years at the IU Opera and Ballet Theater. Very large productions, very large, unique facility, and sort of a lot of challenges regarding how to manage the size and scale of the projects and the facility that is there. Again, this was 20 years ago, and I was the first technical director that they ever had that produced shop drawings. Prior to that, they would do sketches on kind of an old-fashioned way. You would sketch on the set design drawings about how we're going to build this, how we're going to build that, and then the carpenters would go away and build that until they were done. And then the set designer would come with another sheet and they would sketch that out. So it was a kind of a slow, methodical process for them to do that. So it was a new thing for me to come in with computer generated drafting as a 29-year-old kid, essentially. And
how was that received by the folks that were working at the facility at the time? Was there skepticism about that new approach, or were they welcoming?
There was some skepticism, and that's my next point here, is that I had 3 full-time carpenters to manage, all of them twice my age. They were all in their 50s, or in the very early 60s and been there for a very long time. So, and this is one of my sort of sidebars here. I made a deliberate effort to work closely with them and get to know them because I knew like I was this young kid that was supposed to do all this computer drafting, bring in sort of a new sense of safety and automation and whip things into shape, if you will. And it was not going to happen if I didn't get along with those guys. So what I deliberately did is the first show and a half that I did, I only did sort of half of my shop drawings. I made sure that they were somewhat unfinished, and I would print them off and I would take them down to the scene shop and I'd put it on their bench and we would talk through how to build it. I would say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. How would you do it? I would just invite them to mark on my drawings and we would mark it up. You know, we would bleed on the drawing together. And it turned out to work really well because they realized I respected them and their experience. They realized I was trying to think things through more carefully and make their efforts and work more effective and efficient and make more use of their time. And so it worked out really well to do that. And that's kind of how I gained their respect in a matter of months, was by doing that very thing, just bringing out the drawings. Let's talk about it. Let's collaborate at this level about how to do this. So
I think that can, just to touch on that point a little bit more, I looked at the attendee list earlier and I don't remember now how many students there are on the call, but I think that's it takes us an incredible amount of confidence and humility as an early career professional to walk into the room and not try to prove that you know everything to the folks who've been there, but instead to deliberately make the choice to make room for them to tell you what they know and to be willing to say, I want to hear what your experience brings to the table. And obviously that was a really smart choice for you to make because it seems to have worked out well, but I just sort of say that for either the students or for anybody who's a faculty member, finding ways to ingrain in our students that ability to come in with that humility will probably take you much further, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I definitely had plenty of days as a proud 29-year-old kid who thought he knew everything. That was also the case, but that effort really worked well. And one of them, Carpenter Bill, we just always call him Carpenter Bill, but I still keep in contact with him after being gone for quite a few years. And he's just a nice guy, and kind of become a father figure. So that's worked out remarkably well. So
that's awesome.
The facility itself, the Musical Arts Center, is what we'll spend some time on here. It's a really unique facility, and I don't use the word unique very often, but it's a really kind of one-of-a-kind collection of different technical systems here. So I'll kind of explain what some of these things mean. First of all, sort of true cruciform architecture in terms of facility architecture. There's 3 motorized wagons, 54 double purchase line sets, 5 motorized light bridges in the facility, and we were doing at that time 6 grand operas a year, large, fully staged 2 or 3 act operas annually, plus 3 ballets. And then in the middle of all that, they do about 60 music concerts each year where you have to bring in a full orchestra shell. And there would be on a Monday night a jazz concert, Tuesday night a band concert, and most Wednesday nights there was an orchestra concert. 100 people on stage for all of them because we had a very large school of music that they needed this facility to perform in. So all of the operas were designed in repertory because they had to be on stage for a tech rehearsal. We would have a performance weekend, and then we would take the thing down and either roll the wagon off, which wasn't always the case, or we'd have to disassemble the set, fly it out, roll it off, whatever, and set up an orchestra shell. So it just depended on the nature of the schedule, but it was a really, this explains why I was, as much as I enjoyed the job and had good funding at the time to do that, I was in that building a lot, managing the changeovers, managing the scene shop. It was a lot of hours, and so that's part of why I was only there for 3 years. It was pretty grueling, and I didn't I didn't know how to say no either.
Sure.
29, 30-year-old kid, it was hard to say no to some of the stuff. So
sure.
I've got a question for Molly. how did you transition from working as a student to a young professional, and what differences surprised you the most?
How did I transition to I think the thing I think of was how much I enjoyed. This is weird to say because I taught for so many years in college, but how much I enjoyed not going to class. You know, especially here at the opera, I was just a TD and I could just do the job full time of being a TD, and I really, really enjoyed that. Being a
Yeah.
full-time TD, and being able to sort of use all this stuff I learned in graduate school with automation and drafting and technical management skills and estimating. Like I could use all this stuff now and put it all to work right away. So that was really kind of thrilling for me. Um, but I think part of the transition was also, as I mentioned earlier, just being humble about my age and experience at the same time. Like I still had a lot to learn. I enjoyed learning. I would ask questions of those above me to learn how to build stuff better, how to teach better, whatever it was. And that has served me well, I think. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. But
Thanks, Paul.
just to kind of put the building in context, I brought up a photo here of the Musical Arts Center. There's two yellow kind of orange boxes in the background. The one on the right is IU Theater and Drama, and the one right next to it is the IU Auditorium. That's the Roadhouse on campus. So in this sort of like square block and a half, there's really 3 proscenium theaters plus a black box and a studio theater, and a whole lot of audience seating. So it's right in the middle of campus. So it's a really kind of special place that they put this this big, rather mammoth facility. So here's a ground plan, and I'll try to run through these so we can get a sense of things. But this is the ground plan of the facility. The main stage there is in the center, and I'll just bring up some arrows here to kind of illustrate this cruciform architecture. What we don't see below the screen is the audience chamber. It's got about 1,400 seats and 3 balconies, in a pretty traditional European style continental seating arrangement. But this was modeled after European opera houses of the time. This facility opened in 1972, which is really kind of roots the technology we're going to see here in a little bit in a particular era. But the idea is that you have a wagon that I talked about earlier. There's a wagon stage left, there's a wagon on the stage right side, there's a wagon upstage center, all of them motorized that can roll up and down stage and left and right to move scenery and stuff back and forth in a really large way. So to give you a sense of depth and size from sidewall to sidewall, it's about 190 feet. So that's a long distance. And then from stage apron edge down there to, I guess, the uppermost part of the main stage area, it's like 65 feet deep. So a large, large space to fill with scenery. So some pictures of the interior. So this is looking up at the rear wagon. It's stitched, by the way. The photo is stitched, so there's a little bit of a waviness in the middle of the photo here. The flat is not broken or cracked. It just looks that way. The wagons are all about 15 inches thick, to accommodate the casters, the framing, and the motors that were in them at the time. And this is just a transition time where we're taking some scenery down. There's a drop cloth on top of that wagon, so you can't see the turntable, but it's about 64 feet wide. It's a large wagon, 52 feet deep, and you can see a ramp there that we would use to roll things up and down. Stage left wagon, that one is 32 feet deep and 48 feet wide. There's many of these things are still in the facility. There's this downstage blue thing. That's an old Kliegel phone patch lighting system there with circuits on the side. The dimmers are directly below that in the basement. Still in use today, still working well. And then a lot of old light fixtures there for a changeover going the wrong way. And then stage right is a large wagon, 48 feet square, that is divided into 3. So it's actually 3 wagons that are 16 feet deep,
Wow.
if you will, each with their own internal motor system. So really kind of fascinating facility for the age and complexity of it. To my knowledge, there's only one other cruciform theater like this in the country, and it's the Metropolitan Opera. It is certainly a little larger. It's got compensating hydraulic lifts and things, so it's got a whole nother level of technology associated with it. But this was designed in some respects to emulate that and other large opera houses, again, in Europe at the time. So this is an interesting picture. This is a slide of the construction of the rear wagon with its turntable. The turntable is 48 feet in diameter, and down center you can see one of the 4 drive mechanisms. There were 4 of these, one in each quadrant. We'll see a little bit better picture later, but there's a few slides that I had of the construction period, so it's kind of fascinating to see this. And then in the very bottom underneath these pieces of wood is one of the caterpillar drives, which we'll also see later, of how these things were crawled back and forth. In 2010, there was a renovation done of the wagon drive system, so it's now using something other than these caterpillar drives, but they're pretty interesting to see, and it's a whole lot of steel involved in the framing here. And the capacity, I wasn't able to validate the actual load capacity on these wagons, but it was pretty substantial, and you'll see some pictures of that. So here's one of the drive systems that each of these wagons had, and this is a Caterpillar drive system is what it is called. It was designed and engineered by Weber Industries out of Ohio. And at the time, I don't know how prevalent they are today, but at the time they did a whole lot of engineering in automotive factories, moving big things horizontally, and in particular using these systems. So this is a 5 horsepower DC motor with a brake on the end, a belt drive over here going to a gearbox, a gear reducer, and then that is connected to this large drive chain. The chain, I believe it was ANSI 200 or 220 size chain, so it's a large chain, and it has these polyurethane covered teeth in it, and they would roll down and into the floor. And that's what this picture is on the right. It's a rack of pins. This is 3 inches wide, and the pins are about 3 inches apart, and it would crawl in there and grab onto those pins and crawl itself back and forth across the stage. So in retrospect, I've always felt this was a little sort of noisy and unelegant, but it was very simple and very robust. I mean, screws and small hardware and stuff that was in its way, it did not care. It was going to move.
I was going to ask about noise as the sound guy in the room.
Yeah.
Especially in a space that's producing primarily unamplified stuff. Did that create challenges or
It did, yeah. And I'll talk a little bit more about noise stuff in a little bit with the turntable, but that was a challenge. Not so much with it meshing into the floor, but just the creaking of the floor as a 5,000, 6,000 pound wagon was rolling across the stage. Even if there was nothing on it, it still was there. And you couldn't always rely on the opera music to cover it because, of course, it could be, soft, quiet, moody stuff, and all of a sudden you could hear this cracking noises. It could be a problem. There's no doubt about that. And there wasn't much of a way to mitigate that. This is one of the turntable drives. At the time, when I got there in 2005, we still had these pneumatic tires on it. So each of the 4 drives had this set up, a 3 horsepower DC motor, belt drive to a jack shaft to these 2 individual right angle gear reducers, and then those tires ran right against a steel rim that goes around the entire perimeter of the turntable. You can see kind of a red sliver here. That is a wheel on the back, which I think was polyurethane, but that was a solid wheel back there, non-pneumatic, and that provided some back pressure against these wheels. So it was an angle iron that was getting pinched between that back wheel and the 2 pneumatic wheels. This was noisy. When you first turn this thing on, those wheels would squeal and slide against the metal rim, and so that was a consistent problem. They avoided using the turntable because of that on some shows because it was too noisy. During my time there, one of the things we did is we tried different wheels. We bought slick tires for like go-karts. We tried all kinds of things. And then I found a 12-inch diameter hard rubber aluminum hubbed caster wheel from like McMaster Car or something. We bought one of those. We took out the bearing. We machined it flat and drilled the holes for it and put it on there, and it was fantastic. It was super quiet. We could adjust that back. We learned we could adjust that back red wheel to the pressure and tension it needed. And we then bought the rest of them and replaced it one summer. And it was it was a game changer. Just that different,
Wow.
that they didn't really either have the time to sort of sink their teeth into fixing that problem, but that became a game changer for them. And my understanding is that they use these very same things in the new Tate Towers control system and motorized system they have today. I think they put in a new motor, but I believe they're using a lot of these same mechanics, which is kind of interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. Just another picture of that. I guess I've already talked about all these things, but you can see the turntable, the rest of that system there. It's about 4.5 feet wide, that opening, 4.5 by 5 feet, something like that. You just pull a lid off the floor and you can get into
Sure.
it. Problem there is if you've got scenery sitting on it and there's a problem, it is a big effort to get in there. You can't get under it from underneath, even though the stage is fully trapped. You can't get underneath there to do anything. You have to disassemble scenery to get to it. So that was one of the concerns they had for a long time. This is another ground plan showing a little bit more detail of the wagons themselves. And you can see the definition of like the stage right ones, and the individual 16-foot deep wagons. But you can see the whole stage was fully trapped. And there were traps in the wagons, and are today, I mean to say. So you can track those, roll those wagons, line them up with the trap, and you could do things through there. We don't, at least to my knowledge, when I was there and since then, they haven't used those in that way throughout its lifetime. But a lot of forethought, in how that was going to be done, and to have that ability to come up through the floor is really kind of interesting. So.
Am I understanding right, Paul, that upstage center wagon, the turntable travels with that, like that's sort of part of the upstage wagon. So
That's
all of the mechanism for the turntable also rides upstage and downstage with that, what is it, 64-foot wide wagon. That is unlike how we normally talk about stage wagons with an offstage winch and a false floor and cable drives and all of that. Everything is on the wagon itself and sort of crawls forward and back.
That's a good piece of clarity, and it's all self-contained, like you say, self-powered. And so there's we'll see a picture later of cable reels that pay out the power and control cables. So as this wagon, like the rear wagon, would roll down stage, those cable reels would pay out the power and control cable inside of those 3-inch track grooves I showed you earlier. So that was kind of a good and bad thing, because occasionally that one of those could get hung up or it wouldn't retract correctly, and then the wagon would run over the cable, which had happened a couple of times. There was some challenges associated with that. So you had to monitor these things when they were moving all the time to make sure there's no one in the way. There was no collision avoidance of any kind, no bumpers, nothing. It was just a push button and a speed pot going to a control system. It's like I said, it's been since upgraded, but pretty interesting 1972 technologies there. So this is what's there now. So this is a Serapid push chain. So the wagon crawler thing I just showed you, that's gone. That's been gone since about 2010. They've replaced it all with Serapid push chain in the floor. So that is a system that I can't really spend much time getting into today. But this aluminum cartridge here houses that chain, and it can get through the sprocket, get pushed underneath the floor, and move the wagons back and forth. So all of the wagons now have this system with a permanent groove in the floor. You can see my shoes there. The groove is almost an inch wide. I think it's just maybe 3/4 of an inch wide. So it is a generous groove, but you have to have a pretty stout knife guy going into the floor to control these wagons, going back and forth. But this allows the tracks to cross one another, because you do have tracks crossing one another at 90 degrees, which is a real challenge when you're doing cable under the floor and stuff. So this renovation, like I said, was done after I left. We started the pieces of this moving a little bit while I was there and started dreaming about what this could look like, but it happened again after I had moved facilities. Vertical, just to look at this a little bit. The grid is I think I put arrows in here. No, I didn't. But the red blobs there are kind of a representation of the 5 light bridges. So that big one on the far right is actually the proscenium header. That is the first light bridge. So that goes from 1 foot off the floor up to about 40 feet off the ground. So the proscenium header is
Wow.
adjustable based upon the needs of the production. The torn towers, which I'm not going to get into today either, or the stage left and stage right proscenium vertical parts of that proscenium can move in and out to some feet. I think it's 48 feet up out to 60 feet or something like that. So that's all
Wow.
motorized and adjustable. It's kind of amazing.
Amazing.
And then there's these 4 other light bridges that are a pretty significant width. That's why there's a strange space in all the manual rigging to accommodate the light bridges. And we'll
Sure.
share a story about those in a little bit. I need to move a little faster. So the shops are on the 3rd floor. So this area that I'm kind of hovering over right now is the paint floor. That's up on the 3rd floor of the facility. So there's a large freight elevator to get things up and down. But that was something to have to manage as well, was kind of the physicality of the space. You know, there's activities going on all day on stage, moving scenery, rehearsals going on, and then upstairs on the 3rd floors where the carpenter shop and paint shop were. So I was kind of managing those throughout the day as well. So a lot going on in a facility like this. And a quick note, the hydraulic pit, that you can see a trap room, which is 13 feet deep. In the trap room, there is an 18-foot circular hydraulic pit. They had originally designed what's called a drum stage, so that the turntable would have come up from the stage, under the stage floor, and have the ability to turn as well as elevate. That was never designed in. It was, I've never found any engineering drawings indicating preliminary designs, but they do have a concrete pit down there because it was originally part of the vision of that facility. Right now it's prop storage. So, so
Amazing.
yeah.
With this incredible amount of flexibility, and this may tie into your current career, I imagine there was some balance both in the original design of the building and with the recent renovation to try and figure out what of those systems were the most important and which were used kind of the most regularly, because just wildly flexible amount of technology in that space. Did those conversations involve whether it made sense to maintain the entire range of functionality that the original system had, or kind of what was not necessarily thrown away, but what was a lower priority for you?
That's a great question. And that I have an answer kind of two-pronged. One was like from the production side of things, we were regularly bringing in guest directors, guest designers, and there was a clear sense we could do anything in a facility like this. We really couldn't, because there's a lot of limitations to it, and there's only so much you can do in a certain amount of time. Budgets are still budgets, etc. But there was a reputation in the theater circle, in the opera circles, that we could do a whole lot, and we could, but there was only so much you could do at the same time. So there's some limitations there. Regarding the facility itself and renovations, the priority became those wagons, because of, like, if one of them went down, it took several hours for me and the house electrician to troubleshoot and figure out which relay was hung up, what cord got, it was time consuming, and you could easily lose a performance night and therefore a lot of money. So that became the first priority, and why they did those just a couple years after I had left. Since then, they have done a full rigging renovation, putting in new shivs into the facility, and a hoist, which we'll talk about in a little bit with the electrics. I believe new seating was put in the past 5 to 10 years, to kind of refresh that. So, but yeah, setting those priorities can be tough. And not everybody understands the capabilities that I think we all can kind of see here, from kind of a standard point of view. So,
So Paul, we've got another question that's come in the chat, and I'm looking at my watch and realizing that we've got 19 minutes left, and I'm just, my feeling is we've covered like a third of your slide deck.
Yeah.
So I just sort of want to make sure that we're all sort of aware of priorities. I want to make sure we cover the things you want to cover. We'll ask Molly's question here from the chat, and then turn it back to you, and we'll stop maybe interrupting so much. We could talk for like 3 hours about the renovation of the Opera Theater. And so we apologize for derailing you. We'll stop for a bit. But Molly has asked, and this is a great question: how did your focus on sustainability impact how you conversed and collaborated with designers? What role did that play for you?
The most practical way that became useful was in, traditional methods, to be very honest with you. I would put extra effort into using stock scenery whenever possible, which is sometimes not fashionable. Some directors don't want to hear we're using a lot of stock because it's being reused and it's not fresh and new and whatever. But I was always looking for alternative materials too, sort of non-traditional materials, if not just 1x4s and plywood and steel, but what else is there that we can use in a creative way to realize whatever the set designer was doing. And usually the set designer really bought into that. Like it sort of spawned an additional amount of creativity in how they were envisioning the set and how they wanted it to be realized and stuff. But it also depends on the style of the show. It gets awfully complicated. And on sustainability, you could talk for hours about too. So so I just want to highlight one of the sort of the big production I did while I was at IU Opera, which used all 3 wagons. It was a production of La Boheme. So this is my CAD plan that I put together while I was there. And La Boheme has 3 acts, and you usually change from act to act by bringing in the curtain. You have either a pause or a full-blown intermission, and then you go to act 2, whatever. We did a live change from act 1 to act 2 with these wagons. I built a 48-foot diameter turntable and put it on top of the stage right wagon. And back here in the upper right corner is where I actually sat and operated it was a chain-driven turntable drive that I created for that. But the wagon would move off stage right, turn at the same time, and then at the right moment, the rear wagon would start coming down stage with about 40 people on it and turning, and the music started to go into Act 2. And it was a really big undertaking. We spent about 6 to 7 months building scenery for this show because all of the scenery for all 4 acts had to be fully realized 4-sided scenery because it was all going to be seen on all 4 sides.
Wow.
So the upstage center was Act 2, and then stage left was Act 3, which takes place on the sort of the outskirts of Paris at the Paris gates and stuff. So the one thing that I will say, and this is Act 2 now in position. So I brought the wagon downstage, and you can see for that wagon to move, all of the legs have to fly out, so none of the scenery gets caught. So you can see the wavy lines here are all soft goods. That has to all fly out so that the wagon can come down. So it was very dark surrounding this. Let me go back to this. And this is sort of the company picture, but that's Act 2 when it rolled down stage. Cafe Mamu here is kind of stage right. There's a house or a shop upstage left, this large bridge, and a lot of people involved. I'm way over here, down left. That's me. My assistant technical director is way up center there, Alyssa. The lighting designer is right there. And so Mike Schwant. And so it was a big undertaking and a really fun thing to be part of. But it was a big production to do. Like I said, about 7 months of building scenery. And it wasn't too long after that I chose I wanted to go over to the IU Theater and Drama Center. And maybe you see why. Like maybe I got burned out doing this thing. But it was a pretty exciting project to be part of. Trying to think of where I want to jump here. There's an interesting story with these bridges. I think I'm going to skip this, but the lesson here is if you hear a funny noise in a line set system or in a hoist, investigate it. And the point here is because basically the answer when I asked about this funny noise when I got there, they said, oh, that they've always done that. They've always made that noise. That's just what they do. Okay, so a couple months later, we had some time and I looked, and we discovered a bend in the frame of the hoist. The hoists themselves, as they are connected and mounted to the purlins up on the grid,
Oh,
and they were actually moving up and down about 3/4 of an inch because that had bent, and you could see metal shavings around the bolt and stuff, and
good golly.
caught it before it became a big problem. But it was important, like figure out where that noise is coming from.
Man.
Jumping quickly to the Prague quadrennial, I just want to touch on this because I'm proud of it. But this is the model that the set designer created in 2014 for the United States contribution to the Prague quadrennial. And she had designed, her name is Klara Ziglarova, and she had designed this sort of circular staircase with this just curlicue stuff, this kind of tornado of sorts. I mean, that's one of the words she used. And then you can see these pieces of paper and artifacts, and those were the photos and speakers and little light fixtures that we were going to put in here to sort of hold and mount the exhibit, if you will, because we were supposed to be displaying theater work from the States. And so that's the model that we had. And I remember her saying, "Are you scared of this?" And, and I said, "No, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but this is really exciting." And the whole point for my applying to do this and be a part of it was non-traditional stuff in a really different way, figuring out materials and a process of discovery. So it was really kind of fun to be part of it. And just a quick, this is St. Anne's Church in Old Town Prague, and where the exhibit was actually installed. We spent 4 days installing it. And then I think we staffed it for 8 or 9 days, and it was a really fun thing to be a part of. You can see the pictures framed and kind of floating in this thing, and then people could climb up inside of that circular staircase inside and sit there and listen to some sound cues and music, look at pictures. They could make a little cut off a piece of wire and make their own sculpture. It's kind of a fun thing to be part of. And like I said, we don't have time to really get into it today, but it was a neat, totally non-theatrical, but very theatrical thing I did. And the group that was involved, we restaged it for USITT a few months later with a great group of people. So I got just a couple slides here. I'm going to try to zip through in 5 minutes here, so we have a little time for questions yet. I took this leap away from theater production and teaching to work in the private sector with Thurn stage rigging about 6 years ago, and now do theater consulting. And I had spent a long time with my students sort of emphasizing the idea that we have a lot of transferable skills. People who are trained in theater, trained in technical direction, trained as technicians, stage managers, the backstage stuff. There's a lot of transferable skills. And when I started seeing myself sort of either hitting running into a brick wall in terms of the work I was doing at the time, or unhappy or whatever it was, that's a whole nother hour conversation. But I realized, like, well, maybe I should listen to my own advice. How can I transfer my skills and do something different and interesting? And that's part of why I took that leap to kind of where I am now. But here's what I think in a nutshell, what I think maybe sets us apart, maybe from other people, in terms of, we cooperate with dramatic personalities a lot. We have to deal with dramatic personalities under tight time constraints all the time, especially when I was in the opera world. And we learn one way or another to deal and cooperate with those dramatic personalities. Sometimes we're the dramatic personality. That can happen too. But we learn to work with that. And I certainly learned to work with that over time. And that we tend to find skills to keep ourselves calm under pressure, and be able to problem solve in a quick way. I irritate my wife all the time because I am so calm under pressure. When there's a big problem coming up, how do we navigate this? How do we deal with that? I just have a very calm, methodical approach to it. Part of it's just my personality, but you've done it a lot. When you're trying to get the show open and figure out something before the lights go on, it's doing that a lot. You develop some really good calm under pressure kind of skills. So, the sort of fourth bullet point there, the ability to play the tape through to the end. which is kind of an old-fashioned way to say it, but that you're thinking through and, sort of quick succession ideation, but also thinking through the consequences of some of those ideas in quick succession as well. Like, you got to get this figured out by the end of next week, and you got 3 ideas. Here's the good and bad of this one. Here's the good about that one. And working through that in quick succession is a really good skill that we develop over time. A thing that I think is interesting, that I think we take for granted and fight with more than we should, is this prefrontal cortex note that I have here. The part of our brain that is dedicated to doing what I just talked about, strategic thinking, playing the tape through to the end, isn't fully developed until we're about 24, 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So it is literally, for some younger technicians and technical directors, that 19-year-old person, they literally don't have some of the brain power necessary to do that. I don't mean to be so blunt about it, but and that's going to come with time, but it takes some time. You can't just force it and pretend it's going to happen until
Mm-hmm.
the necessary faculties are in place. So, and then collaborative team management and being part of cross-functional teams, which we do a lot of that as well. So, the only other thing I was going to finish up on was talking about theater consulting and some of the things I'm doing today, if I had time to do so. But the one thing I will mention is this describing the value of theater systems to people. I found that because I have a lot of experience teaching, but also a lot of sort of hands-on experience as a technician, I have a knack for describing to end users what their rigging system is going to be. If you spend this amount of money, it's going to do this. If you don't have that much money, it's going to be like this instead, and you can still do all these things. And then also describing that to other professionals, which is a very different audience. And what I mean by that is, like, a structural engineer, a licensed structural engineer, needs a rigging system to be described to them in a very different way than the music teacher at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I've realized that quickly in my job now, that I need to do that in a professional way to try to figure out if they understand, if they built a theater before or not. If they have, they know what I'm talking about. If they haven't, I have to spend more time describing the forces that are going to be at work and things like that, all while not telling them how to do their job.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a dance. So
And
anyway,
that's kind of a perfect circle back to your first job, talking to Carpenter Bill.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not taking on his job for him, but including him as part of the process.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah. So
Something in that same vein I talk to students a lot about is that, particularly as a technical director, or clearly as a consultant, or I think in any role as a designer, the people you're collaborating with rarely speak your language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't talk to a director or a designer about velocity and acceleration in terms of feet per second or feet per second squared. Like, they're not going to,
Yep.
that's not their language. And I have to learn to talk about what I need to understand and communicate in their language. And it sounds like you're sort of underscoring that. Like, that's just a big part of what your job is now, and that the skills and the practice you had doing that in theater have transferred to that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. Yeah, and you find a language that you can communicate to people some of these concepts. And again, kind of doing it in a collaborative way. And I did run into, and I'll share a quick side story. The production of La Boheme, the guest director was a gentleman named Tito Campabianco, who was the artistic director for Pittsburgh Opera for many, many years, and had done productions at the Met as well. So he was kind of this high-profile guy late in his career. He started as a technician. He was a technical director
Wow.
many, many years ago, and worked his way up into performance and then into being a staging director for opera and a managing director. So he knew it all. And
Wow.
he liked talking technology and understanding it, and asked me all kinds of questions. So there was no telling him half the story. Like, he knew he wanted to hear the whole story. And that was
Sure.
really
Yeah.
interesting too. So it once in a while you run into a person that has a lot more experience than you expect, and you don't want to look like an idiot when you're talking to them.
Sure.
Interesting points.
What a name, too. Tito Capobianco. That is a
Capobianco,
name.
yeah. And his
That is
personality
amazing.
lived up to all the syllables. He was a really neat guy.
Wow.
He was a really neat
So
guy.
We probably have, what, 5 minutes left here, a little less. So if there are questions from folks in the chat, I know we sort of pushed you through your slide deck quickly there at the end. There's clearly a lot more to talk about, but if there are questions in the chat or in the question and answer, we'll raise them.
And while you're thinking of questions to ask Paul today, we want to ask you for some feedback on who we should be talking to next and what topics we should be exploring. And so in the chat window, you'll see a rebrand.ly link appear. Feel free to follow that link and give us some feedback on where we should be going next.
So Paul, while we wait for people to put together the questions they want to ask you, I'm teaching a control systems for scenic automation class right now, so I'm very much in this vein of things, and I'm not to take us back to the Opera House, but we're going to take us back to the Opera House. I'm fascinated by the notion that when you did La Boheme, that was the big opera that you showed us, right? You were, if I am understanding correctly, you were still using that 1970s technology. So DC drives, that chain Caterpillar technology, which is so different from both the mechanical and controls approach than what we would teach out of like Hendrickson's mechanical design book, right? And so what did that look like for you from a control perspective? It's a very open question, but you mentioned there were no interlocks, there were no safety bumpers, everything's like DC power. So you're talking about potentiometer control versus amplifiers. Like, what was that like for you to explore?
I think it was a matter of a couple of things. I just sort of had to embrace what we had in the facility and how it worked. It was noisy when you hit the go button to turn the turntable. There was a set of large 480 volt contactors that slammed, and then the essentially analog PID control was in place to make that thing move. And so it made a lot of buzzing noises, to be perfectly honest with you, coming out of the enclosures. But it worked. As I mentioned, there could be challenges occasionally, but it really worked surprisingly well for its age. And the turntable that I had built, I was buying automation direct equipment for PLC and just a little bitty touchscreen interface to hit the go button for my turntable to work on that stage right wagon, for example. So it was kind of this interesting meshing of different generations of stuff to make that all work. And it was sequenced with 4 different people with different push buttons on different controls over headsets. We rehearsed it for at least 2 hours one afternoon, just moving the wagons ourselves. And then the next day we had people on stage to do the same thing. And the maestro was playing the music to sequence it all. The maestro hated the idea, to be honest with you, of doing this live change. He completely disagreed with the directorial concept of doing a live change from a musical point of view and I think a historic point of view, but that was between them.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
it did work out, but I remember that tension. Maestro Efron really did not care for that, and
interesting.
Anyway, so yeah.
And so one of the other questions that I had was how you, without sort of safety interlocks and sensors, coordinating the movement. You answered it a little bit already, but there were multiple operators with eyeballs on multiple places and in communication over comm to ensure that there were no crashes or intersections, right? Is that how that got resolved?
Yep, that's correct. And we even had a few people just holding flashlights in the dark so they could see a piece of spike tape. So once a wagon hit a piece of spike tape, something else could happen, or the flying, we would have a verbal go that once all the legs were pulled out to a sufficient height that we could move the wagons. That was a sequence. So it was a lot of sequencing verbally to make things happen. Yeah.
I think that's an important takeaway for contemporary students, right? Who live in, I'm going to gesture at Mercer's iPad, who live in that world, right? Where everything is sort of interconnected and technologically figured out, and magic happens. But to recognize that to use humans and analog, the Mark I eyeball, right? To be part of your control system is I think that's an important takeaway. So that's kind of great. I think that Rachel was just flagging at us that we're out of time. We are at 1 o'clock. So, Paul, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. We'll have to bring you back to do a deep dive into how you saved people from dying from a hoist that wasn't bolted down tightly. Thank you, folks, for joining us for this. We've got another one coming up. I should do the actual announcement here. December 5th. Chuck Filson, who's a senior control systems engineer at Prism Systems, will reveal how ride, show, safety, and network systems come together to create the magic of theme park attractions. We think he's going to be able to talk to us about an actual major ride refurbishment. We're still waiting for some confirmation of NDA, et cetera, but hopefully that will happen. So join us for that. Registration should be open soon. And as Mercer said, we are looking for information or your ideas about topics that we might include for future First Friday. So check out that Rebrandly link and let us know. Once again, Paul, thank you so much. This was great. Thanks, everybody. We will see you all next time.